At 7:37 local time on October 27, 2025, the Eastern Caribbean Sea looked almost peaceful. Morning light spread across the open water, and the calm was broken only by the steady vibration of the USCGC Hamilton's twin diesel engines. The sea held at about 1.5 meters, the wind blew from the east at 12 knots, and visibility stretched to 12 miles. It was nearly perfect weather for patrol. On the bridge, the air carried the mixed scent of coffee and salt. Crew members spoke quietly as they worked through the morning checklist. Then, without warning, the radar alarm shattered the routine. A faint contact appeared at 42 nautical miles, bearing 187. Speed, 21 knots. No AIS signal, no navigation lights, no reply to standard identification calls. Got a runner, the operations officer said under his breath. Inside the Combat Information Center, green and amber displays lit up at once. The first contact, labeled Sierra 1, matched the profile of a steel-hulled high-speed vessel often linked to smuggling routes in the Caribbean. Its track pointed northwest across open water. Seconds later, a second return flashed onto the radar. Sierra 2, larger, heavier, approaching from the opposite direction. Within moments, the system analyzed its track and radar signature. Venezuelan Navy Guaycamacuto-class patrol ship. Range, 40 miles, closing fast. If neither vessel changed course, the two tracks would meet in less than 12 minutes. On Hamilton's bridge, all conversation stopped. The commanding officer leaned over the chart table, marking bearings with a pencil. "That's not a coincidence," he said quietly. "They're crossing our intercept box." No one needed further explanation. That morning, the Coast Guard's mission was to stop suspected smugglers in international waters, not to play a dangerous game with a foreign navy. But now, both realities had collided in the same patch of sea. Inside CIC, the red lighting dimmed further as technicians refined frequency bands. The electronic support console listened for radar locks or weapons control signals. Nothing yet. On the surface plot, three symbols now moved in a tightening triangle: Hamilton, the fleeing speedboat, and the Venezuelan patrol ship. Above the main display, one line glowed. Live feed, Sector Key West via JIATF South. Everything was being transmitted in real time to command. The captain's voice came over the circuit, calm and precise. "Hold course. Record everything." At 7:41, the bridge sent out a standard hail. "Unidentified vessel. This is United States Coast Guard cutter Hamilton, operating in international waters. You are closing at high speed. Identify yourself immediately." Silence. Then static. "Try channel 13, the communications officer said. Another hail. No response. The Venezuelan ship stayed on course, increasing speed to 22 knots, its bow cutting cleanly through the swell. Through binoculars, its outline sharpened. Gray hull, forward gun mount, rotating radar dome. Clearly military. Not a harmless commercial vessel drifting nearby. The silence had become its own statement. The captain gave the next order without hesitation. "Set condition 3. Prepare to launch the Dolphin." The deck crew moved instantly. On the flight deck, the orange and white MH-65 Dolphin helicopter rolled into position, rotor blades unfolding in the morning sun. Fuel lines disconnected, rotors began to turn. Below, the 26-foot over-the-horizon RHIB was readied. Cameras switched on. Body cams recorded every movement. In less than 2 minutes, the cutter shifted from routine patrol to full intercept posture. Smooth, deliberate, and practiced. At 7:46, the Dolphin lifted off, its rotor wash throwing spray across the stern. Through its sensors, the whole situation opened up. 3 vessels, 3 agendas, 1 fleeing craft, 1 Navy ship moving to interfere, and 1 Coast Guard cutter standing on the thin line between law enforcement and confrontation. Back in CIC, operators tracked bearings and closure rates. The geometry tightened. The Venezuelan ship's course would bring it within 800 yards of Hamilton's bow. "Maintain speed," the captain ordered. "If we yield the narrative, we lose control of the situation." The helmsman gripped the wheel tighter. "Aye, sir, holding steady." The tension rose quietly, like heat building under steel. At 7:49, the fleeing boat cut sharply north, straight back into the intercept zone. Whether it was panic or planning, the move dragged both larger vessels into a dangerous triangle. "They're using us as cover," the executive officer said. The captain gave a single nod. "Then we follow the rule book." The RHIB hit the water hard, engines roaring as 6 boarding officers accelerated toward the target. Sunlight flashed in the spray as the inflatables surged across the chop. Above them, the Dolphin launched a single red flare, a non-lethal international danger signal arching through the sky between the 2 larger ships. The flare burned crimson, reflecting in Hamilton's bridge windows and across the gray hull of the Venezuelan patrol ship. For 10 seconds, the sea seemed to hold its breath. Engines idled, radios hissed. Every person on board felt the weight of that pause, a reminder that peace at sea can hang on something thinner than a radar trace. Then the pursuit continued. The RHIB cut through the waves, closing meter by meter. Hamilton held its course, instruments stayed steady, cameras kept rolling. The morning sun climbed higher, glinting off steel and spray as the United States Coast Guard prepared to make contact under the eyes of a watching command network. From Hamilton's bridge, everything unfolded in real time through screens and binoculars, a precise choreography of authority, discipline, and rising pressure. At 7:57, the RHIB closed on the fleeing vessel, spray exploding over the bow like shards of glass. Overhead, the Dolphin hovered at 400 feet, its optical turret sweeping the scene in infrared. Inside the Combat Information Center, operators spoke in short, clipped updates: range to target, drift in bearing, rate of closure. The room pulsed with electronics and the rapid tapping of keyboards. On the live feed, the fleeing boat slammed through the swells. 3 heat signatures crouched low near the stern, throwing objects overboard. Packages struck the water, blooming into pale bursts on radar. Evidence dump confirmed, the sensor technician called. Record everything. On Hamilton, the commanding officer watched all 3 vessels converge on the tactical display. Sierra 2, the Venezuelan patrol ship, had now shifted to Hamilton's starboard quarter, holding just under 1,000 yards away. Its speed matched the cutter almost exactly, as if the 2 ships were connected by an invisible line. Bridge CIC, Venezuelan hull, now 0.8 nautical miles, bearing 130 relative, the watch supervisor reported. Copy, the captain said, never taking his eyes off the scene outside. Keep them there. Don't blink. On the starboard wing, sailors watched through binoculars. The Venezuelan ship rose against the bright morning glare, deck crew visible along the rails, helmets flashing in the sun. Its forward gun mount shifted slightly off axis, high enough to signal readiness, restrained enough to avoid an open threat. The message was clear. It was a posture move. At 8:02, the RHIB made contact. Boarding officers threw hooks over the fleeing boat's rails and secured the hull. The scream of twin outboards gave way to shouted commands in English, protests in Spanish, and then silence. Moments later, the radio crackled. CIC, boarding team reports suspects secured. Cargo confirmed. Multiple bales of suspected contraband, approximately 1 ton. Copy, RHIB, the XO replied. Maintain chain of custody. We've got company watching. Because the Venezuelan ship still had not backed away. It was getting closer. 8:06. The CIC radar showed its course tightening toward Hamilton's flank. Bearing difference dropped to 70 degrees. Range continued shrinking by the yard. On the electronic support console, a faint X-band spike appeared. Scan mode, not weapons control, but close enough to raise the pulse of everyone in the room. Captain, the tactical officer said, they're edging into the boundary cone. Noted, the captain answered, calm and unwavering. We stay lawful, we stay on camera, we stay professional. He stepped onto the bridge wing. The morning wind pulled at his jacket collar, and the sharp smell of aviation fuel lingered in the air. Across the water, the Venezuelan cutter's turbines rumbled low and steady. A mile of open sea separated the 2 ships, but the space between them felt tight enough to vibrate with tension. Inside the CIC, every station followed procedure with precision. 1 operator logged bearings to the 10th, range to the yard, even estimated RPM by the shape of the wake. Another marked the missing AIS signal again. Persistent silence. On the main repeater display, a green wedge showed Hamilton's safe water cone, the space no foreign vessel was permitted to cross. Helm, maintain 20 knots, steady on course 085, the captain ordered. Aye, sir, 20 knots, course 085. On the aft deck, the RHIB came back hard, engines roaring as it climbed into the cradle. The boarding team was drenched, faces marked by salt spray and adrenaline. Evidence crates shone wet under the deck lights. Cameras stayed fixed on every movement as crew members recorded timestamps and sealed each package. The Coast Guard's discipline was exact, almost ritual-like. Every clip, every tag, every word was documented. 8:12. Above them, the Dolphin banked into a wide orbit, circling both vessels in slow, controlled arcs. From the air, the geometry of the scene was unmistakable. 1 suspect craft stopped, 1 cutter holding course, 1 foreign warship pressing the edge of provocation. The pilot transmitted a coded burst. A non-lethal laser marker flashed briefly across the Venezuelan bridge, a silent warning preserved in the optical record. On Hamilton's bridge, restraint felt almost physical. Shoulders stayed rigid. Jaws tightened. Every breath was measured. Every instinct pushed toward action, but professionalism demanded endurance. "We do not drift into their narrative," the captain said. "They want a reaction. We give them procedure." At 8:16, the Venezuelan ship crossed within 800 yards, dangerously close. Its searchlights blinked once, white beams sweeping over the sea like part of a staged performance. No radio calls, no signal flags, just a deliberate show of presence. "They're filming," the XO muttered. "They want the footage." "Good," the captain replied. "So do we." 8:19. The Dolphin called bingo fuel and turned back toward Hamilton, still recording every second. The Venezuelan ship matched speed again, bow pointed straight ahead. The two hulls now moved in parallel like mirrored steel. For a moment, the only sound was the sea itself, the engines pulsing beneath the surface. Inside CIC, someone said quietly, "It feels like a duel without shots." "Exactly," the watch supervisor answered. "And the first one to flinch loses." By 8:22, the sun had climbed higher, turning the water into sheets of blinding silver. Hamilton held steady. The Venezuelan ship held its line. Between them stretched 1,000 yards of silence, charged and deliberate, so fragile that even the gulls overhead seemed to hesitate before crossing it. At 8:27, the tension finally began to break, not with words, but with movement. The Venezuelan patrol ship's turbines changed pitch, a deep mechanical exhale that rolled across the flat sea. It held position for almost a full minute, then slowly angled west. No radio message, no signal of respect. Just a measured withdrawal, calm and deliberate. Its wake shimmered in the late morning sun, spreading across the surface like a fading scar. On Hamilton's bridge, the commanding officer gave one small nod. "Maintain visual until she's out of radar range." The reply came at once. "Aye, sir." Inside the CIC, every frame continued to log. At 0831, the Venezuelan hull dropped below 2 miles. At 0839, it was only a weak radar echo, its transponder still silent. Hamilton eased back to patrol speed. The captain stepped inside, poured a cup of coffee, and finally released the breath he had been holding for nearly an hour. "Log it," he said. "Hostile interference. No engagement." That brief line would soon carry far beyond the Caribbean. In Washington, it was 8:27 Eastern Time, and Hamilton's live video feed had already reached the National Security Council. Analysts from the Pentagon, Homeland Security, and the State Department watched the standoff replay in silence. On the large situation map, 2 colored icons, one red, one blue, circled each other again and again, never quite touching. Across the briefing screen ran the phrase, "Gray Zone Maritime Interference." The wording sounded clinical, but everyone in the room understood what it meant. For weeks, Venezuelan patrols had been shadowing American operations near Grenada and Dominica, angered after 2 smuggling boats reportedly linked to their Navy were destroyed during joint U.S. Coast Guard and Navy actions. Caracas accused Washington of maritime aggression. Now, with the Hamilton footage, the United States had something more valuable than accusation, recorded proof that Venezuela had escalated the pressure again, this time without a single shot. The NSC senior director was the first to speak. "This was meant to test our nerve, not our firepower." The National Security Advisor looked up. "We passed," the director replied. "They wanted a reaction they could turn into propaganda. Instead, they got restraint, and it was all captured on camera." Back aboard Hamilton, the crew moved straight into post-incident routine. The flight deck was washed down, the Dolphin helicopter was refueled and secured. The RHIB team, still soaked with seawater and sweat, stacked the seized contraband into marked crates. 1.1 metric tons of suspected cocaine along with chemical precursor materials. Technicians documented everything. Timestamps, samples, signatures. The air was heavy with salt and diesel, but the mood was not triumphant. It was quieter than that. A steady, sober kind of pride. By 8:46, the horizon ahead was clear. The Venezuelan warship had disappeared into the haze, its radio silence never broken. High above, a U.S. Navy P-8A Poseidon continued orbiting at altitude, sending high-resolution imagery back to Florida. Infrared footage captured the fading wake of the Venezuelan ship, the heat signature of Hamilton's engines, and the RHIB's return to the cutter, all preserved in a clean digital record. The United States now had something invaluable, a complete forensic trail of the encounter strong enough to challenge any future attempt to reshape the story. As the morning continued, the sea turned a vivid blue-green. Sunlight flashed off the cutter's white hull, and the American flag moved steadily from the mast. Crew members gathered on the aft deck, faces marked by salt, eyes tired but focused. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. They all understood what had just happened. They had operated within a mile of a foreign navy, stopped smugglers, and enforced the law in international waters without a single shot being fired. The XO stepped beside the captain on the bridge wing. "Sir," he said quietly, "that was closer than most people will ever realize." The captain gave a slight nod. "That's the job. We don't flinch, and we don't boast." He looked out toward the horizon where the Venezuelan cutter had vanished. "In this line of work," he said, "silence sends its own message." Hours later, in press rooms and intelligence briefings, that silence would be interpreted in many different ways. To some, it would signal strength, proof that American discipline can hold even under deliberate pressure. To others, it might look like hesitation, an opening for the next challenge. But for the men and women aboard Hamilton, it meant something far simpler: discipline under pressure. As the cutter resumed her patrol route toward Puerto Rico, the steady vibration of her engines returned. A low, confident hum that seemed to say the mission was over. Above, gulls circled in the sunlight. Below deck, evidence was sealed, reports were transmitted, and the Caribbean slipped back into its familiar calm. But the digital trail remained. Every bearing, every image, every second of restraint, stored far from the scene, ready for whatever would come next. That morning, Hamilton did more than intercept illegal cargo. She demonstrated something deeper. American resolve does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it speaks in quiet discipline. If you believe true strength is measured not only by force, but by control, share your thoughts in the comments. Was restraint the right response, or should gray zone pressure at sea be met with stronger deterrence?